We saw some situations where like Caitlin's stuck guarding Kelsey and Kelsey's, knocking her off the ball and Caitlin gets called for a foul and she starts yelling at the refs like, she's grabbing me, and all of the coaches from WNBA teams who were sitting there watching are just cracking up. Kelsey had one situation where she sort of finished through traffic. She'd been struggling a little bit, got through to the hoop, just like yells right in like Becky Hammon and Nikki Fargas's face, and they're just like cracking up. Like,
watch that body language carefully. Kelsey Plum knocking Caitlin Clark off the ball. Caitlin yelling at the refs about being grabbed. And every WNBA coach in the building cracking up. That's not a scrimmage, that's a battle for an Olympic roster spot, playing out in real time at the USA basketball training camp in North Carolina. And according to reporter Sabrina from The Athletic, who was actually inside that gym, what happened over those 3 days might have just changed everything about the Olympic selection conversation. Because the way she's describing Caitlin's performance, we're not talking about a player hoping to make the team. We're talking about a player who already proved she belongs.
Back on the court, you also got a quote out of Sue Bird about her being impressed with Caitlin just being engaged while she was out and getting back to being able to play. A little bit about what Caitlin looked like on the court, how much fun she was having, how important it was. And then someone else, Angel Reese on the other side, talking about Chicago. That was the article I was not expecting.
Yeah, so we'll start with Caitlin. Obviously, she suffered a lot of just a bevy of injuries in her sophomore season, played her last game on July 15th, even before All-Star Weekend. This was her first real 5-on-5 action since...
Now, this is where it gets interesting. Caitlin Clark hasn't played competitive basketball since July 15th, 2024. That's when the plantar fasciitis shut her down for the rest of the Indiana Fever season. No games, no 5-on-5 action, just months of recovery and rehabilitation. Meanwhile, the 4 Phoenix Mercury players at this camp had their season end September 11th. Different timelines, different levels of game conditioning. So, when Sabrina talks about seeing Caitlin in live game situation again, she's describing a player who's been off the court longer than anyone else there, jumping straight into FIA-level physicality. And here's what matters about FIA basketball. It's more physical than the WNBA. Let that sink in for a second. The league that spent all of 2024 debating whether the physicality against Caitlin Clark crossed the line. FIA plays even harder.
It was a combination of like USA players going against USA players and then also USA players going against the scout team, which was just like players from small colleges all across North Carolina sort of helping out with that scout team practice. And, she looked like Caitlin, right? Like the step back three was there, the passes were there. When she was not playing with Aaliyah Boston, some of the bigs didn't know what to do with her passes. Like there was one time where she passed it to Hamby and Hamby like brought the ball down. It's like, you can't do that. Like this is not, you have to keep it up, right?
Right up, right.
Just like not expecting, where that was coming. But FIBA, naturally, just a lot more physical than other levels of basketball. Even
pay attention to what she just said about those passes. Caitlin threading passes to bigs who don't know what to do with them. Enrique Abenbo out catching the ball and bringing it down, getting blocked because she wasn't expecting the ball exactly where she needed it to go straight up with it. This isn't a criticism of Enrique. This is what happens when you play with a facilitator operating at a different level. Chelsea Gray throws beautiful passes, stylish passes that are entertaining to watch, but Caitlin Clark throws passes with a different kind of intelligence built in. She's not just getting you the ball. She's putting it exactly where your hands need to be, so you can catch and finish in one motion, without bringing it down, without hesitating, without giving the defense time to recover. That's advanced facilitating. That's thinking 3 steps ahead, about not just where the ball needs to go, but how it needs to arrive. When you play with Aaliyah Boston every game, you develop that chemistry. When you're playing with Enrique for the first time at a training camp, there's a learning curve. The fact that Sabrina specifically mentioned this detail tells us Caitlin was making passes that surprised even elite WNBA players.
Physicality was interesting considering how long she's been out and the fact that she's still ramping up injury-wise, but she looked good. She was just like so happy to be there and like was individually like telling media members how nice it was just to like talk to them again and like that she was just part of the basketball process, even if that includes
FIA level physicality from the scout team, not WNBA physicality. Physicality and Caitlin Clark, still ramping up from a plantar fasciitis injury that cost her 2 months of her sophomore season, was going at players instructed to play at international basketball's physical standard. Remember all those conversations during the 2024 season about whether the physicality against Caitlin was excessive? The flagrant fouls, the body checks, the debates about whether rookies were being targeted. FIA basketball makes that look soft. International rules allow more contact, more physicality, more aggressive defense. And according to Sabrina, Caitlin looked good against that level of play, despite being the most out-of-game shaped player at the entire camp.
There you have it, fam. Caitlin Clark been an absolute beast at the training camp. Shout out to her, man. Now, I already kind of knew Kelsey Plum and Caitlin Clark was going to be going after it. All right, those are two players battling for that one position, right? And these are two players that absolutely asked crowds to give it to them.
Now, listen to this part. The step-back three was there. The signature move that broke the NCAA scoring record, that carried over seamlessly to the WNBA, that became one of the most unguardable shots in women's basketball. Still there, still working against USA basketball's best defenders. But it's what Sabrina says next that matters most. Caitlin was so happy to be there, and individually telling team members how nice it was to talk to them again, that she was just part of the basketball process. Think about what that reveals. After a sophomore season that ended in July with injury, after watching the playoffs from home, after months of rehabilitation and uncertainty, Caitlin Clark showed up to this camp and reminded everyone exactly who she is. Not with trash talk, not with drama, with performance. With that step-back three, with those passes that made elite players look unprepared, with the ability to compete at FIA physicality levels while still getting back into game shape.
Saw some situations where like Caitlin's stuck guarding Kelsey and Kelsey's, knocking her off the ball and Caitlin gets called for a foul and she starts yelling at the refs like, she's grabbing me, and all of the coaches from WNBA teams who were sitting there watching are just cracking up. Kelsey had one situation where she sort of finished through traffic. She'd been struggling a little bit, got through to the hoop, just like yells right in like Becky Hammond and Nikki Fargas's face, and they're just like cracking up. Like,
go back and watch that interaction with Kelsey Plum again. Two players battling for the same position. Two players who absolutely thrive on that competitive energy. Kelsey Plum once turned around and told Spike Lee to speak up, that she needed to hear the trash talk louder. Caitlin Clark had an entire opposing crowd yelling at her in college and fed off that energy. Silenced them with her performance. These are two competitors who don't back down from anyone. And according to Sabrina's report, that's exactly what played out at this camp. Kelsey knocking Caitlin off the ball. Caitlin immediately calling out the refs for missed calls. Coaches from WNBA teams watching and laughing because they know exactly what they're seeing. Two elite guards going at each other with everything they have. And here's what that competition reveals. Caitlin Clark isn't at this camp hoping to impress anyone. She's there, competing for a roster spot against one of the best guards in the WNBA and holding her own, despite being the most out-of-game shaped player in the building.
Right. Stirring it up. I love that. Yeah. I love that you could see the storylines continue from the W season into, this camp. And I want to particularly hit on
Kelsey Plum finishing through traffic after struggling, yelling right in Becky Hammond and Nikki Collins' faces, and the coaches just cracking up. Classic Kelsey, they said. That's respect. That's recognition of a player's competitive fire. But notice what else Sabrina mentioned. The storylines from the WNBA season continuing into this camp. Caitlin and Kelsey going at each other. Caitlin getting frustrated with the refs. Players bringing that same intensity that defined the 2024 season into these training camp scrimmages. That continuity matters because it shows this isn't ex-competition with real stakes. Carol Lawson is watching. USA basketball staff is evaluating. WNBA coaches are observing, and every player in that gym knows that performances at this camp influence Olympic roster decisions.
Like how people have been perceiving the negotiations and what still affects them and what they're thinking about with regards to the new collective bargaining agreement. But for now, just good time at camp. 3 days in North Carolina. A little snow on one of the days. Just a little taste of the winter in the South. But
right.
Yeah, it was interesting just to see what Carol Lawson is prioritizing in terms of how she wants to make her imprint on this program.
Here's what makes this significant. When USA Basketball left Caitlin Clark off the Olympic roster in 2024, the official explanation focused on roster construction, veteran experience, and the need for players who had been through the program before. The decision sparked massive controversy, with fans arguing that the league's biggest star and most exciting player deserved a spot regardless of experience level. But that decision was made before Caitlin had played a single WNBA game, before she averaged 19 points and 9 assists in her first 5 games as a rookie, before she recorded a triple-double, before she proved that her college success translated seamlessly to professional basketball, despite dealing with constant physical play and a learning curve with new teammates. Now it's January 2025. Caitlin has a full WNBA season under her belt. Even if injuries cut it short, she's proven she can compete at the professional level. She's developed chemistry with teammates. She's experienced playoff-level intensity. And according to this training camp report, she's showing USA Basketball exactly what they missed. The step-back 3 working against elite defenders. The passing vision that surprises even WNBA veterans. The competitive fire that has her yelling at refs in a scrimmage. The ability to perform at FIA physicality levels, despite being the most out-of-game shaped player there. That's not a player hoping to make the team. That's a player reminding everyone why leaving her off the 2024 roster was a mistake. Sabrina's report makes it clear Caitlin Clark made an impression at this camp. The way she describes the performance, the specific details she highlights, the tone of her analysis. This wasn't just a successful return to the court. This was a statement. And think about the timing. Caitlin's last competitive game was July 15, 2024. Plantar fasciitis ended her season early, forced her to miss the playoffs, left her watching from home while other teams competed for the championship. That's months of recovery, months of rehabilitation, months of uncertainty about when she'd be able to play at full strength again. Then she shows up to this training camp and immediately jumps into 5-on-5 action against USA Basketball's best players. With FIA-level physicality from the scout team, with WNBA coaches watching every possession. No easing back in, no exhibition games to shake off the rut, just straight into high-level competition after months away from the court. The fact that Sabrina describes her looking good in that context, that the signature moves were still there, that she was making plays that surprised veteran players, that tells you everything about Caitlin's preparation during those months away. She wasn't just rehabbing the injury. She was staying sharp, maintaining her skills, preparing for exactly this moment. Now, compare that to the narrative around the 2024 Olympic roster decision. USA Basketball chose experience and familiarity over star power and excitement. They went with players who had been through the program, who knew the system, who had international experience. That was their priority. But here's the problem with that approach. It assumes that talent and competitive fire can overcome a lack of program experience. It assumes that a player who dominates at every level she's ever played at somehow needs years of international seasoning before she can contribute to Team USA. Caitlin Clark broke the NCAA scoring record. She transformed Iowa into a national championship contender. She brought unprecedented attention to women's college basketball. Then she entered the WNBA and immediately became one of the league's most exciting players, despite constant physical play and a learning curve with professional teammates. At what point does the resume speak for itself? At what point does USA Basketball look at that track record and say, maybe we should find a way to get this player on the roster? Because here's what this training camp report reveals. Caitlin Clark doesn't need years of international experience to compete at this level. She needs an opportunity. And when given that opportunity at this camp, she showed exactly what she's capable of. The passes that surprise veteran players. The step-back 3 that works against elite defenders. The competitive fire that has her battling Kelsey Plum for every possession and calling out refs in a scrim. The ability to perform at FIA physicality levels while still getting back into game shape. That's not potential. That's production. That's a player proving in real time that she belongs on this roster, and think about what it means for USA basketball moving forward. The 2024 Olympics are over. The roster decisions have been made, but the next Olympic cycle is already beginning, and this training camp is part of that evaluation process. Carol Lawson is making her imprint on the program. According to Sabrina's, she's prioritizing certain things, evaluating players in specific situations, building toward the future, and Caitlin Clark just showed her exactly what she can do when given the opportunity to compete. Will that be enough to change the conversation about Olympic roster construction? Will USA basketball recognize that leaving their most exciting player off the roster might not be the best strategy for building the program's future? Or will they stick with the same approach that prioritized experience over star power in 2020? Sabrina's report doesn't answer those questions, but it does make one thing clear. Caitlin Clark showed up to this training camp and performed against elite competition with FIA-level physicality, while still ramping up from a months-long injury recovery. The step-back three was there. The passes were there. The competitive fire was there. Everything that makes Caitlin Clark one of the most exciting players in basketball was on full display in North Carolina.So. The question becomes, what does USA basketball do with that information? Do they continue prioritizing veteran experience and program familiar? Or do they recognize that sometimes talent and competitive fire matter more than years in the system? Because if this training camp report tells us anything, it's that Caitlin Clark doesn't need anyone's permission to prove she belongs at this level. She just needs the opportunity to compete. And when given that opportunity, she delivered. That's what happened in college. That's what happened in her WNBA rookie season, despite the injuries, and according to Sabrina's eyewitness account, that's exactly what happened at this USA basketball training camp in North Carolina. The ball is in USA basketball's court now. They've seen what Caitlin can do. They've watched her compete against their best players. They've observed her handling FIBA-level physicality while still getting back into game shape. What they do with that information will tell us everything about their priorities moving forward, and it will determine whether the most exciting player in women's basketball gets the opportunity to represent her country at the highest level. Let me know in the comments. Do you think Caitlin Clark should make the next Olympic roster based on this training camp performance? Or does USA basketball stick with their veteran-focused approach? Because this conversation is far from